In the inception, the earth was without any formation, and the whole universe was still in desolation. Before God began the creation and made everything according to his own discretion, he built heaven and earth with solid foundation and created man so he could take the possession. He placed him in the garden for the purpose of conservation and gave him all things for his consumption without any restriction, but some terms and conditions. It was unto him a wall of protection, so there won't be any means of penetration nor invasion. Man was living in perfection without limitation, for he had divine connection. But along the line he fell into degradation after disobeying God's instruction through the devil's deception, and unfortunately he lost the accommodation and could no longer walk in dominion. His life became filled with confusion and frustration and was in constant affliction. Tilling the ground for survival became his occupation, for he had no option than to serve the punishment for his transgression. Yet he despised God's correction and walked in his own imagination. He thought his addictions could give him satisfaction, but never knew that the end thereof is destruction. God warned him to flee fornication, masturbation, and all forms of corruption and evil communication, but he chose not to pay attention despite knowing the full implication. His decisions kept him under depression, and his self-delusions deprived him of God's promotion. He faced hunger and starvation, but when he came to his realization, he began to seek for solutions to his situation, but he found no medication. And when God saw his helpless condition, he was moved with a ceaseless compassion and sent his only son on a rescue mission of restoration. And even though he wasn't remorseful for his action, yet God was willing for a reconciliation, for sin had brought a demarcation between the Creator and his creation. For God hates abomination and does not dwell in the midst of pollution. So that's the reason for the separation. So out of free volition and not by coercion, Jesus came into the world through incarnation, according to the scripture's prediction. After Mary's divine visitation, where she was informed of her conception, his birth brought a great jubilation, and the angels made a proclamation that the time has come for man's redemption. And this was a confirmation of what Isaiah had earlier mentioned. After 8 days of his circumcision and also the end of his mother's purification, he was brought into the temple for dedication according to God's direction. During the occasion, there was a man whose name was Simeon. He has been in anticipation for Israel's consolation, and when he came in, he gave God adoration for making him to see his salvation. And as the news of his birth was still in circulation, then eventually got to Herod's notification, and when he heard it, he was filled with indignation and sought for the child's elimination, because he got the wrong impression that Christ has come for earthly coronation. So he requested for his location but wasn't given the information, for God knew his intention, and that brought him more provocation. So he gave the declaration of all the children's extermination. But Jesus had divine immunization, for it wasn't written that Christ would die before his excruciation. After all this commotion, Jesus grew and was strong in spirit and wisdom, and was under his parents' subjection. And for 30 years he was in preparation. Then the time fully came for his earthly ministration. But before his manifestation, he needs go through heaven's constitution. So he went down to John for an immersion, after which the Spirit led him into the wilderness to face temptation for 40 days and for 40 nights duration. And after the completion, he returned in a new dimension with great power and unction to give the prisoners liberation, and to them who are in darkness illumination, to rescue man from Satan's intimidation and to deliver the brethren from his daily accusation. He came to pay the price for our total emancipation by shedding his blood for sin's remission. But he got no appreciation from this evil generation, of which you and I were an inclusion, but rather he was faced with rejection and constant opposition from various denominations of the whole congregation. They prefer the ancient superstitions to divine revelation and love men's tradition above God's admonition. But despite all their contradictions, he never gave heed to distractions. His face was steadfastly fixed on his destination. He wasn't after men's recognition but heaven's commendation, because he already had the Father's exaltation. And after he has done his disciples' selection, he gave them the Great Commission to preach with power demonstration and to function through divine inspiration without any obstruction. He took some of them to the Mount of Transfiguration, where they witnessed his transformation. They also saw the miracle of multiplication, how he fed the whole population through divine provision. But after the distribution, 2 of his disciples began to seek for position. And when the rest of them had the discussion, it brought a contention that led to an altercation. But when Jesus saw their dispositions, he knew they needed more orientation about the heavenly vision. So he drew their attention and took them through a series of exposition and illustration, and told them the need for self-crucifixion, submission, and total consecration if they want to see the heavenly mansion. But despite his tuition, one of them remained Satan's possession, who loved the gain of oppression more than the spirit of adoption, and eventually became the son of perdition and made hell his eternal habitation. I pray this will not be our portion. That's why we need to take more precaution. On the night before his humiliation, after the last communion, he took the 11 to his favorite location for a prayer section and charged them to watch against temptation and Satan's manipulation. But their flesh was too weak for participation. And after much persuasion, he left them and went in isolation to a place of meditation so he could ask the Father some questions if it is possible for a substitution, because he felt the tension of our infraction upon his emotions. And at that point, he needed a divine intervention. So the Father had to send an angel of consolation who came with motivation and renewed his passion and assured him of his preservation during the time of tribulation. And on that same night, Judas also went to the chief priest for a business transaction, and during the negotiation, he gave them his means of identification, which was true salutation, because the Jews had been seeking for his assassination but could not recognize him just by mere observation, and for the sake of those who pay him attention. So they needed more clarification before they could carry out the operation. So when the meeting came to a conclusion, an order was given for his forceful abduction, which was a violation of his freedom of expression by the soldiers who came in their population with different kinds of ammunition as if they were going to war with another nation, and the Jews had a celebration as if they were observing a holy convocation. But all this happened by divine orchestration, for it had been written that Christ would die for the whole nation. For he is the only one that has the qualification. God is not the author of confusion. Whatever he says must surely come to friction. So they took Jesus and led him away, and all through the night he was kept under detention. After the chief priest consultations, he was brought before Pilate for prosecution. But after all careful examination with a series of interrogations, he was willing to free him from detention, because he found in him no fault of insurrection. But the Jews were in objection, for it wasn't their expectation. After failing with their evidence of false accusation and character assassination, their next reaction was to file a petition seeking for his death by crucifixion. And when Pilate saw their determination and how they threatened his jurisdiction, he granted them the permission after much contemplation and told them of the repercussion. And without any hesitation, they led him away to the place of execution. Even though he had the power for retribution, yet he never sought for any retaliation, but commended his spirit into the hands of the God of creation. And when on the cross, he cried with a grievous lamentation, and immediately was a serious vibration that broke down the wall of partition, which was an indication that there will be no more restrictions, so everyone can have access to God without exception. For he has died to save man from eternal damnation, because he has become our propitiation. After 3 days was his resurrection, and he appeared to his disciples during their conversation before his ascension, and re-emphasized unto them about the gospel propagation. Now the purpose for this documentation is not for me to have a standing ovation, but for you to have a sober reflection and self-examination that will lead to conviction, confession, and true conversion, so you can have justification and be saved from the great tribulation that will commence after the rapture. This is the conclusion, but watch out for the continuation. Till then, remain in expectation and in preparation for that great occasion in heavenly mansion. I pray it will be our portion.